Hi fellow flyers. Today we're going to build our flight simulator computer. So let's have a look at what you need to make a flight simulator PC. Now we can use the specifications pointed out to us by Microsoft for the new Microsoft 2020. A lot of you are interested in that, concerned about that. What kind of hardware do I need? Now they give us 3 different categories of hardware that we could buy or we could assemble, as I'm going to show you. Very simple enough. You could go out and just find PCs that meet those specifications and just buy them. You'll pay anywhere from probably $1,800 to $3,000. All right. Now some of us, we have the ability, and I'm here to show you, the purpose of this video is to show you that you could build this yourself. You could easily build this yourself. These aren't as complex as they used to be to put them together. Now, as an electronics technologist for many years, used to service TVs and stereos back in the day. My background is electronics, but the simplicity of putting together a PC now, the motherboard is completely made for you. The graphics card just snaps in. The power supply, the plugs only go in certain ports. So for those of you who are up for the challenge, those of you who like to build your own and like to save a lot of money, as we do with Flight Simulator for practice, let's go build our own PC. Now let's point out the parts that we have available to you. Now, if you take a look, now that we've covered the specifications from Microsoft, we use their specifications, whether you're using Xplane or any simulator. Those are heavy-duty graphics specifications that will let any simulator fly beautifully. It'll let any graphics program work beautifully. And in this case, I've spec'd the multi-monitor card so that I can have at least 3 monitors. In my desired setup, I'm going to be using the Real Sim Gear G1000 suite, so I need 2 screens for that. And I want my 3 screens for more realism. I'm using 27-inch monitors for those 3 screens. So, and I'm going to just set those up on a desk and have this beautiful realism in front of me. So building this for Flight Sim 2020 specifications is going to work great for Xplane. Also, any high-end graphics application can make use of this powerful machine. Let's look at the individual parts now. We'll start with the case here. You can see the case is empty. There's nothing in it, but it's ready to go. It's got slots for drives. We're not going to put any drives in here. That's usually your CD drive at the front. As you can see, this is a plain Jane kind of computer. I don't really care what it looks like because it's going to be under the desk. And so in this case here, yeah, it's plain, it's boring. It's got 2 USB ports out front. It's got a microphone and a headphone jack and a power switch. Whoop-dee. I'm not going to do anything more up here. Might use that USB port for something. On the back, you'll notice there are no ports, there are no cards, there is no power supply. There's nothing here. And so we're going to be putting the power supply in. We're going to be putting the motherboard in, which will give us all the ports at the back. It's only got its own fan. That's what came with this particular case came with its own fan, and it came with a plexiglass front. So this is a bare case. In A+ certification courses, I have all the students take their chassis, this is called the chassis, I have them take their chassis down to the bare metal. And around the classroom, as I'm walking around, I say, take it to the bare metal. I want every piece of electronics out of that thing. And then they learn to reassemble. So, I mean, this is stuff that we've done for years, right? So now, inside this case, this is our mini tower case. This is inexpensive. I don't know if I've quoted you already, but somewhere around $60 range, probably $50 range US. And it's not, it doesn't have neon lights. It doesn't have a handle at the top. It doesn't look like a gaming computer. It doesn't have to. All right, what's inside that counts, right? The old expression. Now, the next part I want to look at is the CPU. This is an important part. Look at the size of that box, just for that little tiny CPU. That's the actual size of it right there. That's the actual CPU showing through, all right, the top of it. So this is exactly like Microsoft's spec for their high-end or their desired system. This is the AMD Ryzen 7. Now, it's the 2700X. Now, these can range in price. They can range in price. I'll give you the exact prices in the details that accompany this video. But the exact prices, as I've mentioned already, the overall cost of all of this to build this whole thing was probably around 1,200 bucks Canadian. and so under 1,000 American. So this particular one, exactly what they specified, I went for it just to see how that's going to perform. And that's what we're going to see at the end of this video. And I'll speed up the parts that are boring. I'm not going to have you watch me do every little screw, but you're going to see all the major points as we go along. But this is important. How did you buy the right parts? This is important. All right, now when we take a look at this, we simply took Microsoft's recommendation. We went with this AMD Ryzen 7, perfect. Okay, you could have also bought an Intel, what they recommend. If you bought an Intel, you'd have to get a motherboard that can take this processor. So this is where it starts. Whatever you buy here determines what your motherboard's going to be. All right, you don't buy the motherboard and then go, I wonder what I can put in it. You typically start with the brains first, and then it has to fit and be made for the motherboard. All right, so we got this. Now this one's good because it comes with its own cooling fan. It's actually a pretty cool one. It actually lights up LED, so it'll look nice in your plexiglass window if you're after that sort of thing. But the point is, the cooling fan, the cooling mechanism for your CPU is already built in. That's a good thing. We don't have to mess around with gels. We don't have to mess around with finding the right fit. Will this one fit on top of that CPU and all that mess? It's all in one, ready to go. We're good. So the CPU is taken care of. We know what we're after. The next step would be right on the website where you buy your stuff. It'll recommend the motherboard to go with it. Now this is a gigabyte motherboard made for an AMD chip. It's made for, it's called an AM4, or what they call a socket AM4. If you look up the specs for a socket AM4, it will talk about what CPUs can fit into it. All right, so we've matched the two together. And in fact, most websites where you can buy these things or buy these components, including Amazon, when you pick the CPU, it'll recommend 3 or 4 motherboards. All right, and you just pick the price range that you want or the features that you want. The one thing to remember about this is, 1, it works with that CPU. 2nd, how much memory maximum can you put in? So this is important, right? The memory chips, now this is your standard everyday DDR4 chips. Your memory has to fit on that motherboard, and a motherboard can only take so much. It might have 4 slots, but it might have 16 gig maximum. So that's an important point to make too. This motherboard can take 32. We need 32. I bought 32. We're good. All right, so I'll take all of these parts out once I've got my anti-static stuff on, but we'll show you what each one looks like. That's the motherboard. And what the motherboard does, it's the whole main board inside your computer. That's why they call it the motherboard. And the motherboard will give us this whole area right here of all the different ports, your USB ports, your sound ports, all the rest of the ports. When we put in the sound card, it'll take up one of these slots and all of the ports going out to your monitors. So these things will all get filled in as we start putting things together. This big hole gets filled in as we put the power supply in. So let's go with the power supply next. Oh, let's do the case first. Let's just show you the case cover. Here we see the case cover. Like all covers, they simply, now this has plastic on it for protection so far. Like all cases, and we'll show you this when we finally assemble it, but like all cases, they have 2 screws. These ones have nice thumb screws, so it's easy with the hand to undo them. But like all of them, they have 2 screws, and this part just slides out or back in, and away we go, all right? Now this case does have, if I can find an edge here, can't find an edge easily, but I'll get one later. Oh, there's one right there. Yep. So, and we won't waste time doing this in the video, but you can see that I'm not going to take the whole thing off for the reasons of protection. That comes off that side, this comes off this side, and you end up with a really nice clear view there. And then you'll be able to see that nice multicolored cooling fan LED display. If you like that sort of thing. It doesn't matter to me. I've had plenty of computers that don't have plexiglass. You don't really need it, but you know, why not if it's pretty. Okay, so now we got the idea what needs to be done there. Let's move on just to show you some more parts. Now, the first thing I want to show you, everybody, is anti-static. Yep, anti-static gloves, which you might feel foolish wearing, but you know what? You're going to save your investment. Let me just tell you about this. In all my years of servicing, probably 30 years now, if I didn't wear anti-static gloves, I probably destroyed my investment. In other words, I'm going to use this card, take it out of its case. It's in an anti-static bag, by the way. I'm going to take it out of its case, and I'm going to be handling it while I put it in the computer. My body can give little zaps that we don't even know about to that card can end up being destroyed. I'm serious, I've done it before. So have many students who've worked with me. Same with the motherboard. It's got delicate parts on it also, should be anti-static. Same with the hard drive, it's got electronics in it. Same with the memory. So when we look at all of these parts, we just say, we gotta have some kind of anti-static to hold on to them, all right? The one thing I didn't show you, one thing I didn't show you here was the hard drive. This is a solid state 500 gigabyte SSD. SSD stands for solid state drive. And an SSD card, an SSD hard drive is really just memory. It's light as a feather, it's tiny, and it's shaped in the shape of a hard drive, and it has a bunch of memory in it. But they use it as a hard drive. As many of you know, megabytes, gigabytes, they're all the same measurement, whether it's on a hard drive or whether it's in memory. So that'll hold the operating system, that'll hold the flight simulator files, that'll hold everything that normally is held on your hard drive. And the memory part, I did mention it briefly, but the memory part here is a 32 gig. This is a DDR4. Comes in a complete package of 32 gig ready to go. And finally, the display card that's going to go in it. The display card here, sorry for the label there, it's from shipping. This is the GeForce GTX 1660, and I'll put that in the description so you can see that. They do recommend this card for Flight Simulator 2020, and one of the reasons I picked this one, there is a card like this that's cheaper. There's a card like this made by the same company, Gigabyte, that does single screen. It's cheaper because it does one screen. And that's a nice high-res screen for many of you who don't want to have multiple monitors or you don't have the space. In this case, I'm going to be powering 3 27-inch monitors, very high resolution, and 2 monitors for my Real Sim Gear G1000 suite. So 5 screens. So this will provide 4 of those screens. I got to find one other screen, okay? So that's why I picked this one. I think my price was somewhere around $340 Canadian, so under 300 American. Now we want to pull out each of those parts and we want to assemble them. So that's going to be next. Now let me just do, I talked about, you know, the foolish gloves, and you might feel foolish wearing them, but this will save you a lot. When we were working with anti-static, there's 2 ways you can do it. You can wear a wrist strap, which I used for years before I had the gloves, one way or the other. And let me just talk about that for a second. It's important, you guys. I know it's a safety thing, but just like with flying, we talk about safety even though it might not be a flying thing. But in this case here, we just don't want to zap stuff. We don't want to put stuff in and find out things don't work. So this goes on your wrist, just like a watch. You put it on your wrist, and it has a detachable button for when you walk away from your workstation for breaks or whatever. The other end goes anywhere on your chassis, anywhere at all. Doesn't matter where, as long as it's connected somewhere. Now, of course, for safety reasons, and this is important, you guys, I teach all the A+ courses since A+ was invented. For safety reasons, you never have your computer plugged in while you're wearing a wrist strap, okay? Matter of fact, you never have your computer plugged in while you have the case open. I know you can, and it didn't hurt anything. I did it, Howard, I did it. It's not good safe practice, all right? So unplug first is always the rule. Snap on your anti-static is the second rule, all right? Now, for those of you who can't afford or can't find one of these things, maybe you want to get going with your product, with your project, you could go without both of these things, but I'm going to suggest to you that while you're working on your computer, you always have one hand on the metal, probably right here in this case. One hand on the metal. Now, normally I'll be looking straight down at it, which will change the camera for that. But in this case here, one hand on the metal while I'm working on it, and that way I'm always grounded. But look at that, you lost a hand. I mean, now that you're trying to do everything with one hand, kind of a pain, all right? That's the cheapest way to do it. You don't need any extra gloves or anything. But, you know, this is the best way to go. And you feel like Mr. Clean, right? Let's just go make sure everything's not dusty. So this is the better way to go, you guys, when you start working with parts. Now, I did not mention about the power supply itself. This power supply doesn't matter which one you buy, doesn't matter the brand. There's many different brands and many different prices. What matters is the wattage. How much can it power? All right, you look at the specs again from Microsoft because they're good specs. Here's a 500 watt. Now, some of you might say, well, Howard, you should go with 750. Yep, if I were to put in multiple monitor cards, if I were to put in something else to make the thing work harder, 500 is plenty. 750, well, you got more than you ever need. But you go with it if you want. You want to put a 750 in there, probably if you're going to upgrade this machine later, put in a whole new motherboard or something. For me, I just build new machines. So if I build a new machine and it needs 750, I'll go buy a 750. All right, but this will work just fine. They're all standard. They'll fit right in here, no problem. They come with mounting screws, and that'll be the first thing we're going to put in. And so when you look down here, there's where it's going to be installed at the bottom. In this chassis, it's actually at the bottom. Most computers, it's sitting at the top, but you know, why not? Take that heaviest thing, put it down here. And they've got some cooling areas down here and some cooling areas up here. Can't wait to see this thing roll, huh? All right, so now knowing all those parts, let me just go take a look at motherboard first. I want to look at that first because I want to just show you what that looks like. And with the motherboard here, what I'm going to do just to make it easier for viewing, and then I'm going to change the cameras around afterwards. In this motherboard, they actually give us, in this case, they give us a couple of hard drive connectors. Beautiful. That'll go with hard drive. Beautiful. And maybe even a CD drive. I'm not putting one of those in. Or I should say a DVD drive. Don't need one nowadays. All right, now here it is. And you'll notice, as noisy as it is, you'll notice it comes in this, what looks like some kind of plastic. And you think, well, isn't plastic a static kind of thing? Normal plastic is. Normal plastic will give you more static. Just the nature of plastic and the fact that the properties of it. But in this case, this is actually an anti-static, sorry for the noise. This is actually an anti-static envelope that it's in. While it's in the envelope, you can touch the outside all you want. But once you bring it out, you better have anti-static something going on because you're touching a motherboard. Look at this. Just by doing that, I've got my whole hand across all kinds of electronics. I could have zapped it already. I want you to know that because so many people have followed my advice, bought their parts, and zapped them and said, I kept getting dead parts. I would say, are you using anti-static devices? All right, so there's the motherboard. There's the main board of your computer. Man, look how, all that technology in one place. Over here, there's all your connectors. Oh my gosh. I'll do some close-ups of every one of these things before you, so that you can have some still shots of them also. And then during the assembly, I'm going to have a top-down camera so you can see exactly what's going on in here. But to show you some other things, this is just from the wide-angle view, you guys. To show you some other things in here, here's the battery that keeps the time and date for your computer, a little tiny watch battery. Here's where your video card's going to go and point out the back. Here's the rest of your back connectors, audio, USB. I see here some more USB here. There's your network port. There is already an HDMI. I'm going to try to make use of that for my 5th screen. And then we see another DVI port. So we actually have 2 video ports right from the motherboard. So you could have 2 screens without buying a video product. Like you wouldn't need to buy this 4-screen card for 350 bucks if you can get by with 2 monitors. It already does 2 monitors. Beautiful. All right, and over here we see a couple other things that we can use. Now in here, you'll notice there is where the CPU fits, right there. And there's a little flip that we can use for that to open it up. And then when you push it back down, it grabs all the pins. There are hundreds of pins on this thing. This is an important part. We're going to know how to orient it. I'm going to teach you that. And we're going to know how to put it in properly, gently, let it fall in, close it and lock it. We're good. All right, so that's really important. And that's as complex as it gets. The other harder part, or the other hard part, will be just connecting it to the main chassis. And they have a bunch of screws here, 1, 2, 3, probably about a dozen, around the board just to secure it. Now let me just say this. If you secure this without spacers, in other words, if you were to just take this, put it into your chassis, and put in all the screws, you're going to short it out. All these parts that are sticking out, all these electronic pieces that are soldered are going to short out against the motherboard, or against the chassis. So you've got to use some spacers, as they call it. And so we're going to go and look at the kit that came with the chassis, and we're going to see that there are some screws to help us for installing this so that it's raised up just a bit and doesn't touch the metal. All right, once that's installed, we're going to put in the CPU. We're going to put in the memory. We're going to put in the power supply. The very last thing we're going to do is the actual video card. The last thing we're going to put in, all right? So keep that in mind as we go along. That's the motherboard. I'm going to leave it on. It's anti-static. There's a good way to store it until you need it. Perfect. Let's go have a look at the CPU. What does that look like? and I keep things handy to help us with this. I'm going to use this knife. It's open now. I'm committed. What does a CPU look like? This is exciting. And then I'm going to just open it like that. Look at all that. Believe it or not, that little tiny CPU board needs all of this. A couple of connectors, some Scotch tape to hold it all together. This plastic comes off. This whole fan unit here is the cooling part. This is the actual fan that pushes it through. It's like a radiator, you guys, right here. So it's got a fan here. It's got its own cooling fan. It's got its own radiator. It's got its own part where the actual CPU is going to sit. So the actual CPU, which is in a separate box right here, there's the actual CPU. This is going to sit with its face right against here. And that's going to mount right in your motherboard. All right, so that's what we're going to do. It's exciting. It's also scary because you've never done it before, right? No worries. It already has some a special adhesive on there, so we don't need extra glue. All right, so that's what we're going to be working with. Put those things back in also. For now, just showing you stuff, right? Show and tell time. All right, just like that. What does this look like? This is the video card. Oh boy. It's like Christmas. So we look in here, yeah, I thought so. There is, with all video cards, there's usually a driver, but I'm going to make some suggestions for that, you guys. You're going to go and find the driver on their website. It's going to be a later version. Never use the driver from the CD drive. And in fact, I'm not even putting in a DVD drive. All right, so you don't need this, but you might use it for reference to find what model you're looking for. Now, this styrofoam here also, normal styrofoam is staticky. You've seen when pieces of styrofoam stick to you. This is not. This is an anti-static styrofoam. Trouble with that though, it's black, meaning it's not recyclable. As soon as it's dyed a different color, or it's some type of different composite there to keep it from being static, it's probably not recyclable. It's my guess anyway. Maybe they've changed the technology, but that's my guess. All right, let's have a look at this card. What does that look like? Heavy in my hand. I'm wearing anti-static gloves. Now that's cool. Now this card has its own 2 coolers, which will be running all its own. All the electronics and cooling pipes and everything else that's in there, faceplate. But the main thing is the connector right here. I can do this because I have anti-static on. The connector, which will go to your motherboard. That'll just snap right in exactly right there. All right, and the second part is, I'm gonna put that back on for protection, keep it clean. Second part is the ports. All these ports at the back are HDMI ports, or in some cards they have mini HDMI. These ones happen to be, no, they look like normal HDMI ports on all 4. Now that's a display port. So these are display ports on the back. But anyway, you just have to get the right connector, right? So you'll figure that out as we go along. We'll talk about it as we go along. But anyway, that's it. There's an expensive add-on that's optional. That'll give you 4 ports. And if I can enable these 2, I have all the ports that I need for video. Now, the memory part and the hard drive part, I'll take those apart and show you when I'm actually installing them. I don't like handling memory unless I really have to. Those can be zapped very easily. Again, everything you see here, just a minute, let me do the crackling part first. I want this back in here. Everything you see here is anti-static. Wow, that's noisy. Everything you see here is anti-static. Now, one other thing I wanted to talk about was, well, I haven't unboxed the power supply, so we'll just do that last, and then we'll get into assembly, you guys. So this power supply, these are the simplest parts. I mean, there's nothing to them. Certainly they're complex and all the rest of it, but the point is for putting them in, for installing them, it's not a hard thing. There's the power cord that goes to the wall. There's 4 screws in it to make it happen. And the actual power supply has all the cables you need and the main unit. That's it. It really isn't that hard. 4 screws and you're done. All right, so this is actually the easiest part, and some cases come with it. I'm always making noise with plastic in this demonstration. Let's move that over too. So in here you can see this is a Smart 500 thermal take, which is a very common brand for these things. Has its own fan right here. My case has its own fan for more ventilation. That's the key for these things. This thing gets hot. The more power it needs to generate, the hotter it will get. And so we want to have these things also as quiet as possible. That's simply going to mount in with these 4 screws into the back of your chassis. And that's probably the easiest part that we'll start with first. So there's our first task. This has to go in there. Let's do that. I'm going to reposition the cameras so that the cameras can look straight down at what I'm doing. You can get a closer view of each of these things as I do them. Thanks for hanging in there so far. Let's go build our PC.